Hi Stampers, this is Kim with Great Inspirations. Thank you so much for joining me today for another in my series of Stamp Happy Card Making card tutorials. Today we're going to be talking about joyfold cards. What is a joyfold card, you ask? Well, it is a card. It's your basic A2 size card, which means it's 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 in the front, or 5 1/2 by 4 1/4. So either portrait or landscaped orientation. But this card, the front of the card has been shortened, and then a mini card has been attached, to which you put your focal image. Then you can open up the card, and there is your message on the inside. Now, there are many ways, actually, to make a joyfold card, and a whole lot of different cutting dimensions you can use for either the card base or for the mini cards. But today, I'm going to talk about, for me, the easiest way I can remember cutting dimensions for a joyfold card. We will be talking about a lot of numbers, so don't worry about those, because there will be a corresponding blog post for this video, and you will find the link to that corresponding blog post in the description of this video. So let's talk about these cards for just a little bit. I'm going to put these two aside. As you can see, these two cards are basically the same. The card base is just a little different, and of course their orientation is different. This a portrait orientation, and this one a landscape orientation. The mini cards are different sizes. This one happens to be 4 by 3, and this one is just a 3 by 3 square. So what that means is when you cut your mini card, the length of the card, you need to double it. See, I want it to be 3 here, so I need to make this 6 inches. But the height can remain at 4. For this one, 3 by 3, the height will remain at 3, but the length of the cardstock, I'm going to make 6 inches, and then I will, of course, score it in half at 3. And that's just what I did on this one. The length was 6 inches, but I scored it in half by 3. Let's take a look. This one is, of course, a portrait orientation, but it also has the 3 by 3 square focal point or focal panel on the mini card. And that's I did exactly the same as I did here. I cut it 6 by 3 and then scored it 3, folded it in half, and there we go. For this one, this mini card and this mini card are actually the same dimensions, but instead of cutting it 6 by 4, because of the orientation, it needs to be 8 by 3 and scored at 4. The exact same size, just cut for a different orientation. Does that make sense? We do it all the time when we're making cards. But now, so those are for the mini cards. Just a few tips about cutting the mini cards for the focal image. Now, you can cut these any size you want, as long as you like how it looks on your card. But let's go and talk about these card bases for just a few minutes. There are specific dimensions you can use to just cut and score, but it's always hard for me to remember them. I cannot often remember, where did I file that? Did I file it under joyfold? Did I file it under fun folds? Where did I put it? So for me, the easiest way to remember dimensions that work for me, and you can change them up because there are various dimensions for these types of cards, but just to stick with what we know and what we do every day when we're making cards. For an A2 card, we have basically 2 ways to cut it. We cut it long way, so it's 11 inches by 4 1/4. Or we cut it so it's 8 1/2 by 5 1/2. And then, of course, we score it on this one at 4 1/2. And on the 11 inch by 4 1/4 at 5 1/2. That's exactly what I do for my Joyfold cards. But then, I'm like, okay, so I need to shorten this front flap of the card. I just cut it in half. So what I do, say for this one, I have my 11 by 4 1/4 piece of cardstock. I'm just going to put it in here at 5 1/2 and score, which of course I've already scored. And then I'm like, okay, the front of this card is 5 1/2 inches wide. I need half of that. What is half of 5 1/2? Well, it's 2 3/4. So I simply put this at 2 3/4. I cut. Oops. And there's my base for my Joyfold card. Now, let's say you wanted that to be, this flap to be just a little longer. No problem. We're still going to start with the 4 1/4 by 11. We're going to stick it in here and score at 5 1/2, just like we always would. And it's like, okay, I'm going to fold it. You don't have to fold it, but I like to fold it just to give myself that image to look at, the 5 1/2 across. Okay, I want my flap to be 3 inches. Okay, so 5 1/2 inches minus 3 inches equals 2 1/2 inches. So I'm going to put this in at 2 1/2. And I'm going to cut. And there is my Joyfold card. Only as you can see, the front flap is just a little wider. So that's how you do that for the 11 by 4 1/4. And then these pieces you can use for mats or you can use for other projects. Now let's talk a little bit about the portrait. This one, of course, would be for your landscape version of the card. This is for the portrait version. And it is 8 1/2 by 5 1/2. And I've already scored it at 4 1/4. So what that means is, okay, this is 4 1/4. What is 1/2 of 4 1/4? Well, that's 2 1/8. So we just put it in here at, make sure you can even see this. Didn't even think about that. 2 1/8. Just cut it. And there's our card base for our portrait Joyfold card. And it's the same if you want this to be just a little bigger. I'm going to put this in here. Put it up here, the 8 1/2 inch side, and we're going to get it to 5 1/2. That's not right. 4 1/4. We're going to get it at 4 1/4. And there we go. That looks much better. I'm going to score it. Take it out. And like I say, you do not have to fold it, but just for me, it helps me with my math. Okay, so this is 4 1/4. And half of that is 2 1/8. Well, I want just a little more than 2 1/8 inch. So let's say let's go with 3 inch on this again. Okay, so 4 1/4 minus 3 is 1 1/4. So that's where we're going to put this in at 1 1/4. At least I'm going to try. Okay. We're going to cut. And there we have our Joyful card with the 3-inch panel on the front. You can, work with this and make it any width you care to. The length will stay the same. It's the same with the other orientation. The length will stay the same, and you can change the width. Now I'll talk a little bit about what I was talking about with the inside panels. This one is the one we talked about. It's square. It's 3 by 3 when folded. So that's 6 by 3, scored at 3, folded, and you have your little mini card. And like I was talking about for these two cards, the front of the mini cards are exactly the same, but because of the orientation of the card, this one being landscape and this one being portrait, we had to change the cutting dimensions. So for this one right here, like I said, it's 4 by 6, and then half of 6 is 3. So we're going to score at 3 inches. I'm going to fold, and here is our mini card. Then for this particular, paper trimmer doesn't want to stay still for me. For this particular orientation, it's 4 by 3. So we need 8 by 3. That's what we have here. And we're going to put it at 4 because half of 8 is 4. Get our cutting blade or our scoring blade, and we will fold. And there's our mini card. Now when we go to put the Joyfold cards together, get one of these out here. For example, we have this one, and you will cut your DSP to whatever size you want. If you want it to be, like for example, this is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, then you'll want it to be 4 by 5 1/4, just a 1/4 inch difference. And then you'll measure this. This is 2 1/8 by 5 1/2, so it'll be 1 7/8 by 5 1/4. And then once your designer series paper is on there, and you've either stamped on here or have whatever you want for your focal panel, I've got the wrong one, your mini card, you need to remember it's going to go backwards. We usually have cards opening from the right hand side. This one, from the left hand side. This one will open from the right hand side. Now I'm getting all confused. So you center it where you want it, and actually you can center it on the inside of here if you care to. And hear it. And then this is how it opens. Easy peasy. And that's exactly the exact same thing you do when you're dealing with the landscape version. I've adhered it inside. Fold this flap, fold that one. There's your Joyfold card. Put this one up here. And here's the landscape version. I'll move this one over here. And then here's the portrait version of this card. Now all the supplies I've used for these cards, including the stamp sets and where I got the designer series paper and the ink colors, will also be in my corresponding blog post. Thank you so much for joining me, and until next time, Stamp happy!